And we're back once again talking about the Seattle Kraken expansion draft. And when it comes to the Pittsburgh Penguins, probably the only thing that Urinating Tree and his Legion of Yinzers are looking forward to less than the Penguins losing a player for free to the Kraken in the expansion draft is the idea of watching another season of Tristan Jarry and his glove hand. Well, probably that and having to continue to watch the Pirates or an aging Big Ben, but we'll stick to hockey for now. While, even as we speak, the Golden Knights continue to reap the rewards of allowing the Penguins to convince them to take Marc-Andre Fleury back in 2017, the good news for Penguins fans is they're not likely to lose another Fleury-level player to the Kraken in this expansion draft. But there still are a few players that will offer pretty decent options for the Kraken to pick up here. But as always, let's start with the players that they'll be able to protect from the Kraken, where on the forward end they do have a couple of no movement clauses, but those are on Evgeny Malkin and Sidney Crosby, who both would probably be protected regardless. And because, again, I think this is another team that's likely to go the 7-3 route, that means there's still 5 spots left. A couple of which I think are pretty much guaranteed to go to Jake Guentzel and Kasperi Kapanen. And then those final 3 spots might be a little bit more up in the air, but I think Brian Rust probably has one of them, as well as Jason Zucker. And then that final spot, well, this definitely could be up for debate, as some people would have them protecting Brandon Tanev here. Instead, I think that it's more likely they end up protecting Jared McCann. The reason that I have them protecting McCann here over Tanev is, well, for one, McCann is 4 years younger than Tanev at 25 to Tanev's 29, but also because Tanev is on a contract that sees him earning $3.5 million through 2025, while McCann is earning just under $3 million until the end of next season, where they'll have to figure out how to re-sign him. And while that is something that will maybe present a bit of a challenge for them, especially if he continues to produce like he did this year, that does still offer them a little bit more flexibility when it comes to their cap issues than Tanev does with that longer term contract. At least one piece of good news for the Penguins, though, is that they don't have to bother re-signing any more players before the expansion draft, because regardless of which direction they go with the protection list, they are covered as far as the exposure requirements are concerned, which is also the case on the defensive end, where, again, they do also have a no movement clause in Chris Letang. But again, as Letang continues to produce pretty well for them even at the age of 34, he'd probably be protected anyway. And then those final 2 protection slots on the defensive end I do think are fairly straightforward and would be going to Brian Dumoulin and Marcus Pettersson. And that, of course, just leaves us with the protected goaltender. And well, this is probably not something that many Pittsburgh Penguin fans are ready to hear right now. I think it's pretty straightforward that Tristan Jarry ends up being the protected goaltender here. Of course, the other option would be Casey DeSmith, but I don't think that the Penguins are quite as ready to move on from Jarry as some of their fan base might be. So then, as we now move into the players that this would leave exposed for the Kraken to pick from, on the forward end, the guy with the most as far as NHL experience is concerned and the most proven player at the NHL level would be Brandon Tanev. Now, again, there's no guarantee that he is exposed, and if he isn't, that probably means that a guy like Jared McCann isn't, in which case I think McCann is an easy pickup for the Kraken. But I still think McCann ends up protected, so let's look at Tanev. The 29-year-old winger is now just short of having played 300 regular season games at the NHL level across 6 seasons, in that time putting up 92 points on 42 goals and 50 assists. So as that points output might suggest, this is not the type of guy that you're looking at as a top 6 type of points producing forward. Instead, the part of his game where he does excel and that could still very much get him onto that protection list is the physical part of the game, where he definitely is a high-level contributor there. Already with 984 career hits, and again, those less than 300 games, including having well over 100 hits in essentially every season he's played in the league, including 2 seasons well over 200, and almost 300 in the 2018-19 season. he does play a very punishing style of hockey, which is perfect for a third line, and again is a style of play that we've already talked about the Kraken potentially leaning towards, especially with Ron Francis as their GM. Now, of course, pretty much always being under 50% when it comes to Corsi 4, and pretty much always negative in expected plus minus, he certainly doesn't jump out the sheet when it comes to advanced possession type of stats, but he also isn't so far in the other direction that he's likely to hurt your team more than help it when he's playing that physical game. So again, Tanev is very much the style of player that I think Ron Francis is likely to be looking for on the forward end, especially considering the defensive physical type of game that the Kraken are likely to play for at least their first couple to maybe even few seasons in the league. Plus, Tanev is also, with this protection list, very much the most likely option when it comes to a player who is already under contract through next season, which does make him a little bit more likely for a pick from the Kraken. But if, when it comes to the Penguins, Seattle is more willing to go the RFA route, or maybe they just don't necessarily like the look of how long Tanev's contract is, then they could go for a slightly younger guy that plays a similar type of role as Tanev does in Zach Aston Reese. At 26, he is a little bit younger, and like Tanev with just 51 points in his 161 career games, he isn't that much of a point scorer, but again offers a very physical, punishing type of play. Maybe not quite to the same level as Tanev, at least at this point in his career, but he is likely to offer up 2 to 3 hits per game. Plus, if you are a little bit more into possession and possession stats, then he is a little bit better there, where he's closer to 50% when it comes to Corsi 4 and positive expected plus minus of 6.4 over the course of his career. But if they were to go more that RFA route on the forward end, personally I'd rather see them take the chance on a guy like Teddy Blueger. Like Aston Reese, he's another 26-year-old center, but doesn't offer quite the same amount when it comes to that physical, punishing type of play style. And when you look at his career stats, doesn't seem to jump out all that much more when it comes to points production, with just 54 points in his 140 career games. However, this last season, he definitely showed a noticeable uptick there, where he had 22 points on 7 goals and 15 assists in the 43 games that he played, which definitely is a noticeable improvement from what he had been doing up to that point in his career, and if he can continue that trajectory towards more of a point scorer, especially from the center position, that's definitely something the Kraken are going to have a harder time finding in the expansion draft than physical forwards. Obviously, the argument against taking Blueger over Aston Reese is the fact that Aston Reese is much more of a sure thing when it comes to getting what you're looking to get out of him with that physical play style, where Blueger, this is kind of the first season that we've started to see that he could be at least a decent points producer down the road at the NHL level, where even at the AHL level, he was really not much more than a half a point per game type of player until his last season, where he did get a little bit closer to a point per game. And now at the NHL level, at least is showing improvement year over year, so hopefully he can continue that. On the defensive end from the Penguins, probably the only guy when it comes to somebody with a contract that could be a realistic option for the Kraken here would be Mike Matheson. The 27-year-old is a decent point scorer on the defensive end with 107 points in 343 games, and over the course of his career is pretty consistently around the mid-20s when it comes to points over the course of a full season. Obviously, we haven't really had that for the last couple of years, but again, granted, we're expecting a full 82 next year. That's kind of what you would look for from him. Outside of that, there's really not a ton else that jumps out about him statistically speaking, other than maybe if you're really into block shots, you'd be a little bit concerned because over the last couple of seasons, he has dropped back there quite a bit, where he was nearing 2 block shots per game the 3 seasons leading up to these last 2, where he has been closer to and even under 1 block shot per game. He also doesn't offer a ton when it comes to the physical part of the game, and with possession stats, it's anywhere from average to below average, where he's pretty close to 50% as far as career Corsi 4 is concerned, but pretty substantially negative when it comes to expected plus minus. However, while again Matheson is a pretty solid defenseman with probably plenty of years left in his career, The reason I think he probably ends up being safe from selection by Seattle, at least without any incentive from the Penguins to pick him, would be his contract, which sees him earning just under $5 million per year through 2026, which is a lot of money on a pretty long contract to be committing to, with the flat cap likely staying the way it is for the next couple of seasons, if not longer. And honestly, if it comes down to picking a guy with a contract from this team, and it's either him or Tanev, both of whom again have longer contracts, I'd rather have Tanev, especially with his contract being right around $1.5 million less expensive per year and 1 year shorter. But again, on the defensive end from the Penguins, there's still the option of going the younger RFA route and looking towards future potential with a guy like Mark Friedman. The 25-year-old right-shotted defenseman hasn't played a whole lot at the NHL level to this point in his career anyway, but the reason I'm bringing him up outside of being just 25 and being a right-shotted defenseman is the fact that in the 5 games he played for Pittsburgh after coming over from Philadelphia at the end of the season, he scored 2 goals and an assist for 3 points in those 5 games, which is definitely pretty good points production even with it being a very small sample size. Now, with that having been said, those are 3 of the 4 points he has at the NHL level up to this point in his career, and even at the AHL level, or really even any point he's played in his career so far, he hasn't proven to be much of a point scorer at all, so that might be a little bit more of an anomaly in 5 games, but still, he is a young right-shot defenseman, so it might be worth taking the chance on. Putting aside for a second that DeSmith, who will be turning 30 before the start of next season, wears the number 1 on his jersey, which looks pretty weird on a hockey jersey in the first place, much less a goaltender jersey. He has played pretty well in the time he has gotten at the NHL level so far in his career, having played in 70 games in 3 of the last 4 seasons, 58 of those as a starter, where again, statistically, he has looked pretty good. And in each of the 3 seasons he's played in, he's been above average when it comes to that save percentage, and below league average when it comes to goals against average, obviously both of which being very good things to be on that end of. Meanwhile, at the AHL level, where he's spent the rest of his time since 2015, it's been a little bit more of a mixed bag. He had an incredible 2016-17 season, where he ended up winning the Hap Holmes Award with a goals against average just above 2 at 2.01 and a save percentage of .926. But the last couple of seasons that he's played at the AHL level in the 2017-18 season, and then again all of last year, he's been much closer to 900 with a 910 in the 17-18 season and just over 900 at 905 in last year's play in 41 games. But again, even with that underwhelming AHL season in between the last 2 NHL seasons, he still has remained consistently pretty good at the NHL level in the time he's gotten to play. Ultimately, he's pretty much just fallen victim to the fact that the Penguins have been putting their future goaltender hopes in their 2013 second-round pick, Tristan Jarry, who, to be fair, played very well last year at the age of 25 with a .921 save percentage and a 2.43 goals against average. And even though he did take a bit of a step back in this last regular season, he was still right around league average with a .909 save percentage and a 2.75 goals against average, which for a 26-year-old goaltender is still pretty good. The problem is, and the reason that a number of Pittsburgh fans are not particularly happy with him at the moment, is that when it got to the playoffs, he kind of fell apart as the Penguins blew a 2-1 series lead to the Islanders, losing 3 straight and losing the series 4-2, where Jarry had an .888 save percentage and a 3.18 goals against average, as he pretty much lost them a couple of the games in that series. But again, with that being said, he still does seem like a promising young goaltender of the future, so I don't think that the franchise is going to overreact from one playoff series. The point here being that I don't think there's much chance at all that Jarry ends up exposed. And if he were to be exposed, I think the Kraken would be all too happy to snatch him up. And even with him protected, KZ DeSmith is still a pretty decent option in goal that I could see Seattle going with. Now, there are still plenty of other good goaltender options that they will have in the expansion draft, but there's nothing stopping them from even potentially taking 4 goaltenders, with DeSmith being one of those, and then trading one of them away for whatever they can get. It's something that they will almost certainly be doing with a few defensemen, and that Vegas did with some defensemen after their draft, so that pick and trade is still definitely on the table here. So ultimately, when it comes to the Penguins in the expansion draft, I think Seattle ends up picking up a forward here from Pittsburgh. Assuming McCann is protected on the forward end, which not everyone is assuming at this point, and if he is exposed, I think Seattle picks him up pretty easily. But again, assuming he is protected like I think he will be, then the choice for Seattle comes down to picking a guy with a contract, even if it is a longer one, in Tanev, or going with an RFA that might be a guy like Aston Reese, who could be a future Tanev, if you will, or maybe Bluger, who could be a little bit more of a points producer, but is a little bit less of a sure thing when it comes to what you could get out of him. As far as any potential trade options with Pittsburgh, well, I don't think that one's particularly likely to happen here, and not because Pittsburgh doesn't have incentive to make something happen. Again, they have a couple of contracts that they probably wouldn't mind help with Seattle taking off of their hands, especially considering they're already projected to be over the cap for next season as things stand right now. The problem for the Penguins is they don't have as much that they can offer Seattle in return. Their prospect pool is quite a bit lighter than a number of other teams, but that is probably where they would have to draw from, as they really do not have a ton of draft picks to offer either. So I do think, at least at this point anyway, that it's most likely that Pittsburgh just goes ahead and lets Seattle take one player and gets it over with. But it will be interesting to see how the Penguins do handle the expansion draft. With that, though, we have reached the end of this one, so if you have made it to this point, thank you very much for watching. If you did like or enjoy this video, there are buttons for that kind of stuff down below. As always, I'd love to hear your thoughts on the Penguins, who you think they end up protecting, and who you think Seattle could end up getting from this team down in the comments section. Otherwise, stay safe out there and be good to each other. Peace.